It started with the silence. In Minneapolis, entire neighborhoods just went dark overnight. Businesses shut, streets emptied out. It was a complete, sudden absence. The media called it hysteria. They were wrong.
They were dead wrong. This wasn't panic. This was a calculation. We're talking about a coordinated withdrawal from public life so total that the phones just stopped ringing. That's not a rumor, that's a strategy.
And tonight, we exposed the truth behind that silence. This wasn't about protests. This was about a quiet, deliberate, and terrifying shift in federal power. Moving from challenging if you could stay here to challenging if you were ever legally here at all.
A single street confrontation rerouted the entire federal machine. Suddenly, the fight wasn't about deportation anymore. It was about denaturalization. It was about permanence.
Stay with us as we expose the full truth right here on News Focus Podcast. If you want the news they don't want you to hear, hit that subscribe button right now. Okay, let's unpack this. So let's start with the event itself, this vanishing. What did it actually look like? I mean, paint a picture for us, because silence is an abstract idea. This was physical.
Oh, it was completely physical, and it was chilling. Think about a busy neighborhood, maybe near the Carmel Mall area, normally buzzing, right?
Yeah.
People everywhere.
Always back.
And then suddenly it's not. We're talking barbershops with the lights on, the poles spinning, but every single chair is empty. Restaurants ready for the dinner rush, but the phones are just ringing off the hook and no one's picking up.
So it's not that they closed down, it's that they were open but abandoned.
Precisely. It's an act of abandonment. It's a statement. And it wasn't just businesses. Families started canceling appointments, doctor's visits, parent-teacher conferences. Kids just stopped showing up to after-school activities.
A lot of everything.
Everything. And then you look at the digital layer, the rideshare apps, which are, the lifeblood for so many people in that community for getting around. You open the app and it just says unavailable everywhere at the same time.
No way. That sounds coordinated.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound like panic. Panic is chaotic. This feels organized.
It was absolutely organized. This was not a protest meant to be seen. This was a strategic retreat designed to become invisible. Information in communities like this moves through closed channels, text threads, private groups, phone calls. It's faster and more trusted than any news report.
So when one shop closes, it's a signal.
And when 10 shops close, it's a directive. The community was calculating. They weren't just running scared. They were trying to buy time. They were getting off camera, avoiding any interaction where they might have to show an ID or give a name.
Why? What were they so certain about?
The sources are clear on this. They believed, and it turns out they were right, that the list already exists. They knew this wasn't random. They knew the government was hunting with precision.
And that precision hunting started with a specific event, the trigger, December 19th, 2025.
That's the one. ICE agents were conducting a targeted vehicle stop. Let's be really clear about that word targeted.
Right. This wasn't a general patrol. This wasn't a checkpoint.
No. Targeted means they have a file, they have a name, they have a location mapped out. This isn't fishing, it's a spear. And when the community saw that spear hit and the chaos that followed, they knew it wasn't the only one the government had.
They sensed the dragnet was already in place, and this was just the first person being pulled from it.
Exactly. So what do? You go silent. You create a data blackout. You make it impossible for them to find new targets by just, being out and about. It was an instinctive but brilliant countermeasure. They introduced fog into the government's field of vision.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the vanishing, that was the community's move. But the confrontation itself, that one incident, is what rerouted the entire federal strategy. It went from a local problem to a Washington, D.C. problem in a matter of hours.
It did, because this wasn't a peaceful protest. The witness accounts we have describe crowds closing in on the federal agents fast. The situation was deteriorating so quickly that chemical agents were deployed. You can hear it in the calls for backup. The agents believed they were being overrun.
And that's the tripwire, isn't it? An agent reporting they're under physical threat during an operation.
That is the absolute tripwire. Procedurally, that report goes straight to the top. It's no longer about immigration enforcement. It becomes an issue of officer safety and the obstruction of federal law enforcement. Politics goes out the window. It's a security alert.
So once that line is crossed, that jurisdiction, Minneapolis, gets a massive red flag next to its name in a file in Washington.
A permanent one. They do not forget that. When physical resistance happens, the federal strategy has to adapt. It signals that street-level operations are now high risk and unpredictable.
So they have to find another way.
But
a quieter way.
A way that doesn't involve streets at all. But what really sealed the deal was the response of the local police.
Right, they showed up. What happened?
They arrived, they separated the crowd from the agents just enough to de-escalate the immediate violence, and then they withdrew. They just left.
Wait, hold on. They left the federal agents there alone to handle it.
Completely alone. They upheld the city's sanctuary policy in the most direct way possible. And in doing so, they made a massive statement.
The statement being, this is not our problem, you're on your own.
Exactly. But here's the thing people misunderstand about sanctuary policies. They don't block federal law. They just reroute the responsibility. When the local cops stand down, the problem doesn't disappear. It gets kicked upstairs, all the way up.
So Washington is looking at this and saying, okay, we can't rely on local cooperation on the ground anymore. Trust is gone. We can't risk our agents in these street-level operations.
The risk assessment changes completely, and the federal government is forced to develop a new strategy, one that doesn't need local police, doesn't need straight access, and doesn't involve physical confrontation.
So if you can't enforce the law on the street,
You enforce it on paper, you move the fight from the street to the file room, and that is a much, much more dangerous fight for the people involved.
which brings us to phase 2. This is the part that didn't make the news because it didn't have sirens. It arrived in the mail.
It arrived with the quiet thud of a legal notice. After the street confrontation, the Department of Justice quietly, but very broadly, expanded its use of citizenship reviews, denaturalization cases, all tied to existing fraud investigations.
This is the shift we talked about at the top.
Right.
From presence to permanence. Can you break that down? Because it's a huge difference.
It's everything. Deportation is a threat to your presence. It challenges whether you can physically stay in the country right now. Maybe you overstayed a visa or there was a criminal issue. But denaturalization, that's a threat to your permanence. It challenges the very legality of your citizenship from the moment you got it.
So it's not about what you did yesterday. It's about what you wrote on a form, maybe 20 or 30 years ago.
Precisely. It's a forensic audit of your life's paperwork. They're looking at the original naturalization application, every document you submitted, every statement you made under oath. They're hunting for a single flaw in that foundation.
And this is terrifying for people who have built entire lives here. They own homes, they have businesses, their kids are citizens who were born here. They thought it was over, that the paperwork was final.
They believed they had the ultimate legal shield. And suddenly, they get a notice that the government is reopening that file. And the fear changes. It's no longer about a public protest. It's about a frantic private call to a lawyer. It's about digging through boxes in your attic for a document from 1995.
It's the terror of conditional citizenship. The idea that the ground you've been standing on for decades wasn't solid after all.
And legally, the government has a high bar to meet. They can't just do this on a whim. They have to prove two things. First, that you concealed or misrepresented a material fact.
Okay, material. There's that word again. What does it actually mean? Is it a typo on your birth date?
No, it's not a typo. That's the critical distinction. A material fact is a piece of information so important that had the government known it at the time, they would have denied your application. Or, at the very least, it would have triggered a major investigation that likely would have led to a denial.
So like concealing a criminal record from back home, or lying about your marital status to get a green card.
Exactly, those kinds of things. The second thing they have to prove is intent. They have to show that you knew you were lying and you did it on purpose to deceive the government. That's the harder part, proving what was in someone's head 30 years ago.
But this power, this ability to denaturalize someone, this isn't new, is it?
Not at all, and that's what makes it so potent. This isn't some new law passed in a panic. The statute has been on the books for ages. This is just an old tool being picked up and used with new, systematic, data-driven precision.
And the courts have backed this up.
Consistently. The legal principle is that fraud unravels everything from the beginning. It's called void ab initio. It means the citizenship was never legally granted in the first place. You held a certificate, but it was based on a lie, so legally it was never valid.
That's devastating. But the part that really gets me is the ripple effect, the derivative citizenship.
This is where it becomes a generational catastrophe. If a parent's naturalization is revoked because of fraud, their status is nullified retroactively.
So legally, it's like they were never a citizen.
Correct. And if their children, who might have been born abroad, gained their own citizenship through that parent while they were minors,
Then their citizenship is built on a foundation that just crumbled.
It can be challenged and potentially revoked as well,
Yep.
because their legal claim to that status was derived from a parent whose own status was just declared invalid. Now, to be clear, if a child was born in the U.S., they are a citizen under the 14th Amendment. That's safe. But for those who naturalize through their parents, their entire legal identity is suddenly at risk.
My God. So a lie told by a father in 1990 could result in his son, now a 40-year-old man with his own family, losing his citizenship in 2025.
That is the precise and terrifying implication. And that is why the deep silence fell over the community in Phase 2. The risk was no longer just personal, it was about the potential destruction of an entire family's legal existence in America.
So we have to get to the why. Not just the confrontation, but the bigger picture. What was the underlying failure that forced Washington to take such a drastic step to start weaponizing these old denaturalization statutes?
It comes down to a complete collapse of accountability at the state level. It wasn't one thing. It was a systemic failure across multiple massive state-run federal programs. We're talking SNAP benefits, unemployment insurance, even federal education funding.
All different programs, but the same weakness.
The exact same weakness. The audit reports use the term pipeline. The system was just a pipeline for fraud that kept pumping out money, even when all the alarms were going off.
How bad was it?
It was staggering. You had applications for benefits being approved at a massive scale with almost no real verification. During the push to get money out fast in recent years, the checks and balances were just set aside. Red flags were ignored.
So they were just rubber stamping applications to clear the backlog.
They were. Auditors found insane patterns. A single P.O. box linked to hundreds of different unemployment claims. The same Social Security numbers being used across multiple states to claim benefits. It was sophisticated, organized fraud, and the state systems were just not equipped to stop it. They were bleeding billions of dollars.
So Washington is seeing this, seeing federal money just pouring into a leaky bucket, and the states aren't fixing the leaks.
Or they can't. The IT systems are ancient, the fraud investigation departments are understaffed, so the federal government is forced to step in. It's not a choice anymore. It's a mandatory administrative cleanup.
And here's the connection I want everyone to hear. The failure of states to manage financial benefits programs is what gave the federal government the pretext to intervene in immigration status.
That is the critical link. They saw the same flawed data, the same questionable documents being used to get SNAP benefits and unemployment. So they said, fine. If this data is being used for financial fraud, we are now going to cross-reference it against the data used to obtain citizenship.
Wait, so the application you filled out for food assistance could now be used as evidence to take away your citizenship?
Yes. It becomes part of the permanent record. It's a bureaucratic checkmate. If you used a questionable document to get a driver's license, which you then use to get unemployment, which you then use to apply for something else, it's all part of a chain. And if one link is fraudulent, they can now argue the whole chain is poisoned.
And what was the political response when these audits started coming out?
Utter deflection. Instead of answering hard questions about why the systems failed, why audit warnings were ignored for years, the conversation immediately pivoted.
To emotional debates about immigration.
Of course, it's the classic playbook. You use outrage to distract from incompetence. You get people arguing about politics so they don't ask about the specifics of the IT budget or the backlog of fraud cases.
Because accountability doesn't need theatrics. It just needs the records. And the records don't have a political opinion.
And that gap between the loud rhetoric and the quiet, detailed failure is where the real story is. The federal government got tired of the excuses and just followed the paperwork. And the paperwork led them from a failed unemployment system straight to the citizenship files.
It's an incredible cascade of failure. One broken sister feeding a crisis in another. But it wasn't just external. As this federal pressure mounted, something started happening inside the government agencies themselves.
Yes, another kind of silence, the internal one. As the feds started their reviews, the whistleblowers stopped talking. The internal hotlines that are supposed to be used to report fraud and waste, they went quiet.
Why? You'd think that would be the time they'd be calling the most.
You would think so, but it's the opposite. The insiders, the people who know exactly where the bodies are buried, they get terrified. They see the writing on the wall. They worry about retaliation, about being the one left holding the bag. They decide it's safer to say nothing and keep their head down than to be the next person fired or blacklisted.
So the very people with the evidence needed to fix the system are now choosing to protect themselves by staying silent.
And that silence becomes a shield for the people who committed the fraud in the first place. It allows the rot to stay embedded in the system. The disappearance of whistleblowers, right at the moment the pressure is at its highest, is actually a sign that the feds are getting close to the truth.
It's a confirmation that the pressure is working.
It is, but we have to be so clear on this next point for everyone listening. The sources are adamant that this is not about targeting a specific community or ethnicity. The vast majority of people who go through this process are honest.
This is about the documents.
It is only about the documents. It's about the applications, the records, and the statements made under oath. A document is either true or it isn't. The system's integrity depends on that.
And reframing any kind of scrutiny as being biased is a tactic. It's a way to shut down legitimate questions about accountability.
It's an incredibly effective tactic, and it does a terrible disservice to the millions of law-abiding immigrants who did everything by the book. It protects the bad actors and leaves everyone else to deal with the fallout when the system inevitably comes under review. A system that refuses to check its own records will eventually collapse.
And the cost of that internal silence is that the full truth, the real scale of the fraud, might stay buried, even as the consequences for individuals play out.
Exactly. The silence inside the bureaucracy is, in its own way, more dangerous than the silence on the streets of Minneapolis. It guarantees the problem will happen again.
So what does this all mean? The vanishing in Minneapolis was the shockwave, the warning siren. But the earthquake that follows is this quiet, brutal reckoning of paperwork.
Right. And the calm that has settled over the area now, that isn't resolution, that's processing. That's the sound of lawyers reading files, of families gathering documents, of courts scheduling hearings. The drama is over. The consequences are just beginning.
And these consequences don't involve sirens or crowds. They involve deadlines on legal letters. They involve the impossible task of proving the validity of a document from decades ago.
And this is the core takeaway for you, the listener. This whole episode is a story of cascading failure. A street confrontation forced a federal strategy shift. That shift leveraged a massive failure in state-run financial programs. And that leverage is now being used to challenge the most fundamental status a person can have, their citizenship.
Once a review like this starts at the federal level, it doesn't just go away. The files are open. The precedent is set. Assumptions about permanence are over.
The vanishing was the reaction. The reckoning is the outcome.
That's the stark, interconnected reality we're facing when systemic failures are finally addressed. But I want to know what you think. If unchecked fraud and systemic failure in state agencies is what mandated mandatory federal intervention in immigration status via denaturalization reviews, where else might unchecked, politically sensitive fraud in state-administered federal programs, think massive infrastructure funding projects, public housing subsidies, or large-scale education grants, trigger similar mandatory centralized federal oversight that fundamentally changes established state and local systems? Where else is the paperwork vulnerable? Let us know your opinion in the comments below. We read every single one. I'm the host speaker.
And I'm the expert speaker. Thanks for tuning in to this deep dive.